More chilling news out of Asia, or perhaps some closure, depending on how you look at it. But in Tokyo, the leader of Japan's apocalyptic neo-Buddhist cult, Shoko Asahara, age 63, was hanged by the neck until dead on Thursday for his role in the 1995 sarin gas attacks on the Tokyo subway and other brutal acts which result in the deaths of at least 29 people. 6 other former disciples also were executed according to Japan's Ministry of Justice. And that's in the Daily Beast. Link in the description below. It's a quite long article, so I won't attempt to summarize it all, but I wanted to give a few of my thoughts on this situation. And just to refresh everyone's memory, I remember the sarin gas attack in 1995. I was old enough, I was watching the news enough at the time to remember that. And it was quite shocking, and it really put Tokyo in the spotlight, and it made everyone think about it. I don't know, as a child, you know, we had very bizarre views of Japan, what Japan was like, Japanese culture, even though so much of it was pervasive in our own, where we'd even know Japanese phrases, and we knew the names of like game designers, these Japanese game designers and everything. So it was an enmeshed part of the culture, and we knew that it was very metropolitan, and that Tokyo always had this allure to me of being this really massive place. And when I finally got to see Tokyo, I guess I must have been maybe 25, 26 years old. I rode on the subways, and I've been on subways in big cities around the world, and nothing is quite like Tokyo. Nothing is as frantic and as crowded. And I've been on crowded subway cars, but I've never been on ones where I've been pushed out because of too many people. You know, it's like people trying to cram into an elevator. You just don't see it, but that's what happens in Tokyo. People are on a schedule. And the idea of sarin gas going off, especially having been there now, is just such a horrifying thing. And it's good that this freak, with that classic picture, everyone's seen it, of him with the long hair, making this stoic look, claiming to be a Buddha, claiming to be a god, someone, you know, as this article goes on to say, talks about his ambitions for terrorism around the world, wanting to take over the world, anti-American, anti-Semitic, believing like it was a doomsday cult. It was sort of similar, I guess, to the extent that I understand what they believed in. It was sort of a Japanese version of Charles Manson, you know, whereas Manson had the same idea that he had to trigger terrorism to create a race war to end up on top. In the violent and unforgiving United States, you know, Charles Manson died an old man in prison, receiving almost as much praise and as much adoration as a legit celebrity. But here in Japan, I guess, or there in Japan, I'm not in Japan right now, there in Japan, I guess they mean business. And so it did take a long time, because according to Japanese laws, they have to go through the whole process. They have to make sure that they are able to finish every appeal. But his time was up, and this god, this Shiva, this Buddha, this prophet, met his end. And it's kind of nice to hear that, even though it's such a sad thing when you think of the damage he caused, and the lives that were ruined, and the chilling fact that there are still followers to this day. So anyway, link in the description below. This is a Jake Adelstein article. It's quite long, but it's really fascinating, worth reading if you are at all interested in the Aum Shinrikyo cult. Shinrikyo, I'm not sure how to say the first word there, Aum. I wanted to just share a personal story, like I almost got into this earlier, but 1995, I remember I was in middle school, I think, yes, and I was having lunch with my friends, and actually this came up. We talked about it, just sitting with the boys, having our government school lunches. We were talking about this very thing and how scary it was. And of course, I'm sure conversation sidetracked to manga and anime and video games or whatever, but talking about the subways, how crowded they are, and who this guy was, and how crazy he was. And of course, even though we were quite young, we were very precocious. I would say we still followed the news, and table I was with, we all remembered Heaven's Gate, which had only happened a few years prior. It's sort of like America has its share of weirdos like that, but at least with Heaven's Gate, you know, they just off themselves after starting websites and everything. Weird story on that, but at least they weren't out to kill people, except to the extent that they wanted to lure them into a suicidal cult. The situation with Jonestown, which I don't remember happening, but I've studied it since then, where it was considered a mass suicide of 900, was actually, many have argued that it was more of a killing, that these people were forced. And the people who survived it, there were actually a few that survived Jonestown, who later spoke in public, confirmed that it wasn't a completely voluntary thing. Anyway, horrifying news to think about. And with the leader gone, I hope that the movement comes to an end. I hope that they scatter his ashes anonymously or bury him at sea in the same way that we buried bin Laden or something, so that there aren't people who follow this. And I wonder what is going to happen to the future of this cult, if it'll stay on, if there will be some splinter of that persists in the same way that it worked out with Heaven's Gate. And considering that Adelstein's article claims that they had $1 billion in assets at one point, then of course you would say, you know, and again with the Yakuza ties, the criminal backing behind this group, of course you would say, well, it's going to last. But we'll see what happens, and keep an eye out for it. And I guess just pray for the souls of everyone involved, because you know, he's gone, but the threat is still there, and not just the threat of him, but the threat of charismatic leaders and their doomsday cults. And we need to study these events and learn what led to these things, and avoid at all times this temptation that we have as mere human beings to consider certain human beings God. Anyway, over and out.